Hello everyone. This video is an introduction to linguistics.
So we're not talking about just like basic grammar here.
Oh no, definitely not.
This is like diving into the nuts and bolts, the real mechanics of language itself.
Absolutely.
And the excerpts you sent, Akaji and Lyons, these are like the titans, right?
Yeah, foundational stuff.
Okay, so first things first. What even is linguistics?
Good question.
Because Akamajian, he jumps right in, busting this myth that all linguists are these polyglots.
Yeah, that's a common one.
People think you got to be fluent in like a dozen languages.
Right, like we're all walking dictionaries.
But it's not really about how many languages you know.
It's more about understanding the science behind all languages.
It's like you don't have to be a master chef to understand how baking works.
Precisely.
Linguistics is analyzing the structure, how it works, the rules, how we use it to communicate.
The whole system.
And for you, with the ESL background, this must resonate on a different level.
Oh, absolutely.
You're already knee-deep in the practical side of all this.
Yeah, teaching a language you have to be to understand how it works.
Like being a mechanic who not only fixes the car, but can explain every part.
Exactly.
So Akhmadjian lays the groundwork, and then Chomsky enters the picture.
Ah, yes.
With his three models.
Yeah.
Competence, performance, acquisition.
Core concepts.
And these are, I think, really key for someone prepping for a PhD.
For sure.
So break it down for us. What is competence in this context?
Okay, so competence is basically the unconscious rule book you have in your head.
For your native language.
Yeah, for your native language. It's what lets you form grammatically correct sentences.
Without even thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. You just do it.
So it's like you know the rules of grammar, but you don't have to like actively recall them.
Exactly. Think of it like riding a bike.
You don't think about each pedal stroke.
Right. You just, ooh.
That's your linguistic competence.
At work.
Gotcha. And then there's performance, which is how we actually use language in real life.
Right. And that's a bit messier.
Messier how?
Well, it's affected by all sorts of things. Stress, distractions, even just being tired.
So you might know the rules perfectly.
But then in the moment, you mess up.
You stumble over your words.
You make a grammar mistake.
It's like the difference between knowing how to play piano perfectly.
Versus actually performing for an audience.
Exactly. The pressure changes things.
It does.
And finally, acquisition. This is how we learn language in the first place.
Right. The process itself.
This has got to be fascinating for you with your ESL students.
Oh, absolutely. It is.
Because how do kids, with their brains still developing, how do they CRA the code of language?
That's amazing.
And then how is it different for someone learning a second language later on?
Such a big question.
Big questions, yeah.
Still being figured out, really.
Okay, so we have a sense of what linguistics is.
The basics.
But then Lyons, he throws us a curveball.
He does.
He asks, is linguistics even a science?
It's bold. Right.
I mean, that's a gutsy move.
It's a question that's been debated for ages, really.
Within the field itself.
Oh, yeah, within the field itself.
So Lyons makes this distinction between general linguistics and then the theoretical applied side.
Right. So general linguistics, that's about uncovering the universal properties of all languages.
The big picture.
Exactly. While descriptive linguistics zeroes in on the specifics of individual languages.
So general's like looking for the common threads.
The universal grammar, if you will.
And then descriptive is more like zooming in on the unique features of a particular language.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see that.
And this leads to the debate about empiricism.
Empiricism meaning?
Can we study language objectively, like we study physics or chemistry?
Can we observe it, measure it in a truly scientific way?
That's the question.
And here's where Lyons uses that analogy about describing versus prescribing sexual behavior.
Right, a powerful comparison.
It really gets to the heart of it, I think.
It does. It boils down to understanding how people actually use language.
Not how some dusty old grammar book says they should use it.
Exactly.
And you with your ESL students, you must see this all the time.
Oh, constantly.
They're coming from different linguistic backgrounds.
They've got their own rule books, so to speak.
Exactly. Like the classic ESL struggle, it's me versus it is I.
Right.
The prescriptivist would say, it is I is correct.
But people naturally say, it's me.
And the linguist wants to understand WHY.
How does it fit into the overall system of English?
It's about the WHY behind the HIW.
That's it.
And that's got to be huge in your teaching, right?
Absolutely.
Not just memorizing rules.
No, helping students grasp the logic underneath it all.
Becoming confident communicators.
Not robots.
And then Lyons brings up another example, the double negative.
Ah, yes.
I didn't do nothing.
Make some people cringe.
But in some dialects, it's perfectly acceptable.
Perfectly fine.
So the key takeaway here is that language is alive. It's evolving.
Constantly.
And we study it as it is, not as we think it should be.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to Academician.
Full circle.
His emphasis on descriptive rules, not prescriptive ones.
Right. Describing what I says.
But I'm thinking about you again in this PhD exam.
Sure.
And all the different languages out there.
It can feel overwhelming.
It's a lot. Are they really that different?
That's a valid question.
And this is where Academician offers this idea of linguistic universals.
A key concept.
So what are they and why should our listener care?
Well, linguistic universals are like those underlying features that all languages share,
Right.
even though on the surface they seem really different.
I see.
Think of it like houses, right? Houses come in all shapes and sizes, but they all have the same basic function, shelter.
So instead of getting bogged down by all the differences between languages,
Right.
we can focus on the common ground,
Exactly.
the universal principles that kind of tie them all together.
Exactly.
That actually, is kind of comforting,
I think so.
especially when you're facing a PhD exam.
Right.
It can feel a little overwhelming.
And for you, with your background in ESL, this is really helpful
How so?
because understanding these universals gives you a framework
A framework for
analyzing any white language.
even one you've never seen before.
Exactly.
That's pretty powerful.
It is. It's like having a universal toolkit.
For deciphering all the complexity of human language.
I like that.
Okay, so we've established languages share these fundamental similarities,
Mm-hmm.
but they also evolve, right?
Oh, constantly.
They change over time.
And that's where Lyons brings up this concept, the etymological fallacy.
The what?
The etymological fallacy.
Okay, break that down for me.
It's this mistaken belief that a word's meaning today is only determined by its historical origin.
Like where it came from way back when.
Exactly.
We touched on this a little earlier, but can you give an example that might be relevant for our listener?
Sure. Think of the word awful.
Awful, okay.
Originally, it meant worthy of awe,
Wow.
like inspiring wonder.
The opposite of what it means now.
But over time, it shifted. It became something negative, terrible, dreadful.
That's a pretty dramatic shift.
It is. So if we were to teach our ESL students the original meaning of awful,
Yeah,
they'd be pretty confused.
to say the least.
Exactly. So Lyons stresses the importance of synchronic description,
It's
analyzing a language as it exists right now,
at this point in time.
not just focusing on its historical roots.
So our listener, prepping for this PhD exam,
Right.
they need to be able to kind of toggle between those two perspectives.
Yes, absolutely.
Understanding both the current state of the language
The synchronic,
and its historical development.
the diachronic.
You need both.
Both are important. It's like trying to understand a person's personality today
Okay.
without knowing anything about their childhood or their family history.
You don't get the full picture.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, so we've talked about linguistic universals, the etymological fallacy,
Mm-hmm.
the importance of both synchronic and diachronic analysis.
Right.
But Lyons also kind of pushes back on this chess analogy we've been using.
It does.
Why is that?
Well, because unlike a chess game with its fixed rules
Right.
and its defined endpoint,
Yeah.
language is always changing.
It never stops.
It's constantly evolving.
adapting to new situations,
New technology.
new ways of thinking.
Exactly.
Think about how the internet has changed language.
No, completely.
Selfie, meme,
Huh.
hashtag, these words didn't exist a while back.
Now they're everywhere.
And as an ESL teacher, I bet you've had to adjust your curriculum
You have to.
to keep up with all these changes.
Yes, a moving target.
So language is really like a living, breathing entity.
I like that.
It's constantly reflecting the world around us.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to study.
So if languages are always changing, does that mean there's no such thing as correct grammar?
Ooh, that's the big question.
It is, isn't it?
And one that comes up a lot, I bet, in your work.
All the time.
And the answer is, well, it's complicated.
Of course it is.
There are rules that govern how language works.
Right.
That those rules are constantly being, challenged. stretched.
sometimes even broken.
Exactly.
So it's less about being a grammar dictator
Right.
and more about understanding the systems that make language tick.
How they change, how they vary across different groups.
The whole picture.
Exactly.
And this is where Lyons brings us back to the heart of it all, structure and system.
To the core.
He reminds us of Chomsky's definition of language.
As a set of sentences.
Each one carefully structured according to the rules of syntax.
Right.
Okay, so back to syntax. The way words are arranged to make meaningful units.
Mm-hmm.
But Lyons also points out that a sentence can be, well-formed
Grammatically correct.
according to all the rules of syntax.
Yeah.
But it could still be unacceptable.
Or meaningless.
Meaningless how?
Like, it follows the rules, but it doesn't actually make sense.
Okay, give me an example.
How about this? Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Grammatically correct.
Is it?
The subject, the verb, the adjectives are all in the right places, but it doesn't make any logical sense.
It's like a nonsensical word salad.
Exactly. So syntax is important,
Mm-hmm.
but it's only part of the story.
We also need to consider semantics,
Meaning,
making sure our sentences aren't just grammatically correct.
but they're also meaningful.
And they're appropriate for the context.
Exactly.
And this is where your ESL background is so valuable.
I think so, yeah.
You're already dealing with these complexities of meaning all the time.
I am.
Like, think about how a simple phrase like break a leg
Oh, yeah.
can have totally different meanings depending on the situation.
Wildly different.
In the theater world, it's good luck.
Right.
But outside of that, it's not something you want to hear.
Not at all.
So semantics is about unpacking all those layers of meaning.
Peeling back the onion.
And speaking of unpacking, Lyons goes even deeper.
Because.
He points out that even the concept of a word is more complex than it seems.
Yeah, we take it for granted.
We do.
But he introduces us to morphemes,
Morphemes.
the smallest units of meaning in a language.
Okay.
So we think of words as these solid units,
Indivisible.
but they're actually made up of these smaller building blocks.
Like atoms making up a molecule.
Exactly. Like the word unbreakable.
Okay.
It's made up of 3 morphemes, un, break, and able.
Oh, I see.
And each one contributes to the overall meaning.
So understanding morphemes helps us see the internal structure of words.
Exactly. How they're put together.
And for you, with ESL, this has got to be relevant.
Oh, it is.
Think about how you teach prefixes and suffixes.
Right, exactly.
Those are essentially morphemes.
They attach to words and change their meaning.
So morphology, the study of morphemes.
Yeah.
It's essential for analyzing language
Absolutely.
and for teaching it
If we
effectively.
can't have one without the other.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
from big concepts like linguistic universals, language change, down to the nitty-gritty details of syntax, morphology.
Right.
But before we move on, I want to go back to something Lyons said
Sure.
about intuition in linguistic analysis.
Interesting point.
He seems to be warning us about relying too much on our gut feelings.
Our gut feelings about what sounds right or wrong.
Exactly.
It's tempting.
As language teachers especially,
We use our intuition all the time.
it's how we quickly assess a student's grammar.
Or their pronunciation.
But Lyons is saying our intuitions can be flawed.
They can be.
They're influenced by our own dialects, our education.
Our biases even, without us realizing it.
So just because something sounds wrong to me,
Doesn't mean it's grammatically incorrect.
it might be perfectly fine in another dialect.
Exactly. And that's where the scientific rigor of linguistics comes in.
The need for objectivity
We have to test our intuitions.
against real evidence.
Observing how language is actually used.
Analyzing patterns
Formulating hypotheses.
and then testing those hypotheses.
think if they hold up.
It's like the difference between, relying on folk wisdom.
Versus doing a controlled experiment.
Both can give you insights.
But scientific methods.
They're much more reliable.
And objective.
They help us understand the world better,
And this brings us to another key point from Lyons.
which is
Linguistics isn't just about describing language.
okay.
It's also about explaining it.
Explaining it how.
So we're not just like making a list of all the rules.
We're trying to figure out the WHY behind them.
Exactly. Why do languages work the way they do? Why do they change? Why did they have those universal features we talked about?
Yeah, those are pretty fascinating.
And this is where linguistics starts to connect with other fields too.
Like what?
Psychology, neuroscience, even computer science.
That's what I love about linguistics.
Me too.
It's not just language in isolation. It's about understanding the human mind itself.
I couldn't agree more.
And with your background in ESL, you're already bridging those disciplines.
I suppose I am?
You're not just teaching grammar.
Yeah.
You're teaching people how to think in a new language.
That's a great way to put it.
And it really highlights why this whole PhD journey is so important, right?
It does.
You're not just adding to the pile of knowledge about language.
You're contributing to our understanding of what it means to be human.
Wow, that's powerful. Okay, but let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. Back to this exam you've got coming up.
Right. Back to reality.
We've covered so much. Defining linguistics, exploring the subfields. For you, as an ESL expert, what are some of the key things you should be focusing on?
Well, without a doubt, Chomsky's 3 models, competence, performance, acquisition, those are foundational.
They give you that framework.
Exactly. A framework for analyzing any language. And this is important for you.
Because
It helps you understand the challenges your students face.
those models, they apply to both native and second language acquisition.
Precisely.
Okay, what else?
The difference between descriptive and prescriptive rules. This is huge EE in ESL teaching.
It is. You're constantly dealing with that.
Helping students understand how English is actually used, not how the textbooks say it should be used.
Right, like, it's me, not it is I.
Exactly.
We also talked about those linguistic universals.
Right.
Despite all the differences between languages, there are these core things they all share.
And that's powerful for an ESL teacher.
It is, because it helps you see the common ground
Between your student's native language and the one they're learning.
and anticipate some of the challenges they might run into.
Precisely.
We also talk about synchronic and diachronic linguistics.
Looking at both the present and the past.
Exactly. Understanding the language as it is en milieu and how it evolved over time.
Crucial for anyone studying language at a higher level.
It gives you a much more complete picture.
And finally, that warning from Lyons about the etymological fallacy.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
Don't assume a word's meaning today is only based on its history.
Especially when teaching ESL.
Right? Things change. Trying to explain awful as inspiring awe,
That would lead to some confused students.
to say the least. So as you prep for this exam, remember,
Yeah.
think critically, challenge assumptions, and never forget that language is always in motion.
This has been amazing.
It has.
Seriously, this deep dive has given me a whole new perspective on language.
I'm glad to hear it.
And I know you've given our listener a lot to think about.
I hope so.
Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Just this. You've chosen a fascinating and a challenging field. It's a journey of constant discovery, pushing the boundaries of what we know about language and the human mind.
I like that.
So embrace the challenges, ask the tough questions, and never lose that passion for exploring how we communicate.
Beautifully said. We've given you the tools, the insights, and I hope the inspiration to keep digging deeper. Good luck on your exam, and remember the journey is just as important as the destination.
Do not forget to like the video, share it, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for future videos.